Hey everybody, Qroo Paul here. Today I'm going to be talking about verbs of becoming in Spanish. For example, Juan became a doctor. Maria got sad. See, I didn't say become there. I could say Maria became sad. You see, in English sometimes we say became, got, or even went when we're talking about people becoming something, like Juan went crazy. Well, in Spanish, there isn't just one perfect verb to express these things either. So in this video, I'm going to be covering the most common ones. These are verbs, and some are actually phrases of becoming. Ponerse, volverse, hacerse, llegar a ser, convertirse, and it's always important to know the prepositions, right? So we don't forget them. And quedar and quedarse, the pronominal form, and how they kind of play together. I'll get into that. Oh, before I do, just a reminder, if you want some extra practice beyond what I offer here on YouTube, you really want to push your Spanish to the next level, I do have a private learning group called the Qroo Spanish Crew. Inside of there, you'll find exclusive lessons, exercises, weekly live events, and a community of fellow learners to help you reach that next level. And it doesn't matter where you are, absolute beginner, intermediate, advanced, you're going to find something in the Qroo Spanish Crew, all right? I'll put a link to it in the description section and pin it to the top of the comments. So let's go ahead and jump into this whole thing. We're going to kick it off with ponerse. And poner means to put. Ponerse is the pronominal form. And when I say pronominal, some folks are like, do you mean reflexive, Paul? Sometimes not. You know, we tend to learn that when we put se on the infinitive of a verb, it's always reflexive. That's what they tell us. But they're all pronominals, and one category is reflexive, meaning it reflects back on the person. So I just call them all pronominals. It always fits, keeps life simple, all right? Now we're going to be using this when we're talking about becoming something, and this is going to be usually involuntary, temporary changes in state, health, color, or emotion. A lot of times with emotions, you know. A good example is, I became nervous before the exam, or I got nervous before the exam. See, in English we can flip-flop. Me puse nervioso antes del examen. She became happy when she saw her friend, or she got happy when she saw her friend. Ella se puso contenta al ver a su amiga. Now, one thing I want to point out there is one of my favorite little connectors, or even a sentence starter, I'll use it as a sentence starter, is al plus infinitive. And it's like upon doing something. If you don't want to say when she saw her friend because you have to conjugate that verb, you can just say al and pop in a verb. Al ver a su amiga. It's fantastic, should definitely be on your word list, all right? Now I mentioned also color there. Let's mix like color and emotion. He turned red from embarrassment. Él se puso rojo de vergüenza. See, we kind of worked it all in there. Now let's move on to volverse. And this one is going to be used for changes in character or personality or state of mind that feel striking or hard to control. I would say the most common one you're going to be using with this is volverse loco, or for female, loca. And of course, if it's plural, you have to make sure that that, adjective agrees in number and gender with whoever it is. But this is probably the most common one. You could say something like, he went crazy when he heard the news, Se volvió loco, and we could say when he heard the news, which we'd have to conjugate, cuando escuchó la noticia, or upon hearing the news. Al escuchar la noticia. That's a good one, right? It's pretty good for that. Another example could be, Juan became very selfish after making money. So we're talking about a striking thing in his personality. Juan se volvió muy egoísta después de ganar dinero. It's not good. You shouldn't do that. Now, one thing I do want to point out with volverse is that it's often taught that it only applies to sudden changes. In fact, you'll see that description or explanation a lot of times, a sudden change in personality. And that does work for things like, going crazy. But it doesn't explain sentences like, over the years, she became more patient. You see, volverse would fit here as well. Con los años, with the years, ella se volvió más paciente. She became more patient. So when you're thinking of volverse, think of a very noticeable shift on how someone is, whether it happens all at once or little by little, usually, kind of a mental thing, something with their personality. Keep that in mind as we go through some of these other descriptions, okay? And you'll kind of see how they all play together. So our next one is hacerse, and hacer means to make or to do, and here we have the pronominal form. And we're going to be using hacerse for changes that involved effort, intention, or some natural progression. Like this is great for occupations or, you become a certain religion, that sort of thing. Let's go back to occupation. I became a doctor. Me hice médico. And no, I'm not a doctor. That's just a really cool example, right? Like I mentioned before, religion. María se hizo católica después de muchos años de búsqueda espiritual. Maria became Catholic after many years of spiritual searching. And I sometimes struggle flipping languages like that, even in English. I'll say it in Spanish and I'll be like, in English that would be, what's the word? It happens, all right? So with occupation, religion, things like that, this is your go-to verb. And a lot of times it's just taught to use it for those, but it extends beyond that. It can also extend to things like status, lifestyle, or age. For example, he became old. Él se hizo viejo, right? There is a verb to get old also, and I'm going to talk about verbs very specific of becoming a little bit later in this video. So think of hacerse as, this new identity either through choice, like, occupation or religion, or through life's natural path. It can fit that as well. Our next one is llegar a ser, and this one is actually a phrase. Let me get a little bit of coffee here. I know you're probably like, hey, Paul, you should probably have edited that out. Yeah, probably. Llegar means to arrive. So what this says is to arrive, to be. Ser means to be. Llegar a ser. Don't forget the a. This one is used for longer processes that result in some achievement or recognition. It's not something, hey, I just, became a police officer or something. Me hice oficial. No, this is more effort. For example, with effort, he became president of the company. Con esfuerzo, llegó a ser presidente de la empresa. I would say I use this most with people, but you could use it with other things as well. For example, the book became very famous, right? Let's say it took years and people discovered it. This is a good fit for that, El libro llegó a ser muy famoso. The book literally arrived to be very famous. And I've always found it helpful to think of Spanish very literally in my head, so I always phrase it correctly. So I remember these particular patterns that I can pop together to make sentences. All right. Next one on our list is convertirse en, to convert oneself into something. Now, when you learn verbs, it's very important to learn the preposition if there's one that you're going to be using all the time with the verb, and this is one. So on your word list, you've put convertirse en. That en has to be there. We're going to be using this one for more dramatic transformations, sometimes literal, sometimes metaphorical. Think of it as converted into, that kind of became. The caterpillar, la oruga, became a butterfly, converted itself into a butterfly. Se convirtió en mariposa. Another good one for that could be like, the city became a tourist center, like converted itself into a tourist center. La ciudad se convirtió en un centro turístico. Now I'm going to move on to one. It's actually two. So far we've just been talking about pronominal verbs, and here I'm going to be showing both. So we're going to have quedar and the pronominal form quedarse. Quedar means to remain, and quedarse means to remain as well. These are very big words in Spanish. It's a topic of its own, all the different ways that we can use quedar and quedarse. In fact, I have a video for it over in the Qroo Spanish Crew talking about it. I may do one for this channel at some point. It's a big topic. We're just talking about to become, and we're going to be using this when someone's left in a particular state after a change or event, something like that. After the accident, después del accidente, he became paralyzed. He was left paralyzed. Quedó paralítico. This is also your go-to verb when you're going to say that someone was left blind or left, deaf. He became blind after the explosion. Él quedó ciego después de la explosión. And if it's a female, it is ciega. And maybe he was left deaf, sordo, or female, sorda. This is also when you're going to use when somebody is left as a widower or a widow. Maria became a widow at, 30 years of age. María quedó viuda a los, what did I say, 30? Los 30 años. See, that's how that works. Now, here's an expression with quedarse. And quedarse sin palabras is a way to say you were left speechless. It's great. Nice little one for the word list. I was left speechless. Me quedé sin palabras. Pretty good one for that. Now, as we went through this, you saw quedar and you saw quedarse at the end. And I'm going to tell you that some of those could have been quedarse. And I know we love absolute rules all the time, but it's not always going to be the case here. And students often ask me how I know when to use quedar or quedarse with this type of becoming. And the truth is that with many of these, both forms exist. And sometimes you'll hear both versions with certain phrases. For example, with to be left a widow, right, or widower, quedar viudo, you may see quedarse viudo. You may see both. Another thing you'll notice that in certain regions or areas, they may kind of lean towards one or the other. So what do? The safe thing to do is to follow what I have here on the screen. You're talking about the finished event of something. Was left blind, left deaf, became a widow, became a widower, became an orphan. That kind of final event, boom, this fits pretty well. But when you're describing an ongoing process, like, my grandfather is going blind, or Maria is going deaf, those kinds of things, then what you're going to see is normally the progressive form, obviously, like we say in English, but the verb is going to be in that pronominal form, right? One little say on there. My grandfather is going deaf, is becoming deaf. Mi abuelo se está quedando sordo. Maria is going blind. You want to do that one? I haven't had you do anything. I could use some coffee. Maria is going blind. Ready? Maria se está quedando ciega. Did you get that one? Yeah. You're killing it. You're killing it. So there you have it. That is a breakdown of the most common verbs and verb phrases for to become. But it doesn't end there. As I mentioned earlier, there are actually Spanish verbs that are just built in to mean to become something, especially with like physical changes, life changes, things like that. One example is to become old, envejecer. And sometimes you'll hear the pronominal form, but more likely without it. That's just, to age, to grow old. To get fat, to become fat, engordar. Can't talk about fat without being skinny. To become skinny or, become thinner, adelgazar. So there's a lot of these different verbs, and sometimes it's just going to depend on how you're using them. A good example is alegrarse, which means to be happy, but it can mean to become happy. Just depends how you use it. For example, if I wanted to say to become happy, I'd use it, let's say, in the preterite, and I could say María se alegró al ver a su amiga. Maria became happy upon seeing her friend. And see, there it is again, al plus infinitive, upon doing something. If you didn't get anything else out of this video, hopefully you at least got that, all right? Well, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, just do me a favor and give it a thumbs up. And until next time, hasta luego.